Good afternoon. It's my pleasure now to introduce the next invited speaker, which is John Stutz. John is the co-founder of an organization called TELUS, based in Boston. They do a really interesting kind of work. They do scenario planning, looking at how the world globally might evolve in the future. Both in terms of things like climate, but also in terms of social and political organization. And so it's kind of like in the food chain of the Geoweb, this is kind of at the top. John himself, background is in mathematics. He was a professor of mathematics at institutions you've heard of like MIT, Fordham, and SUNY at Albany. So John's had a very distinguished career, and he's going to talk to you, I think, in large measure about an essay called, or a program called The Great Transition that was authored by the TELUS Institute. So, John Stutz.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here. I told Ron a couple of things, one of which is that I have an unbroken record with computers. If I touch them, they don't work. So I'm going to do my best by just restricting my activities to one key in hopes that whatever gremlins usually follow me will stay away. What I'm going to talk to you about is work which has been done at the TELUS Institute over the last 15 or so years. The work began in 1995. It's the product of a collaboration between staff at TELUS and a variety of other organizations. There are two principal products from this work. One is a set of global scenarios. I'll talk a little bit about what those are. There's also a computer model called Polestar that's used to basically track the various components of the scenario analysis. I won't talk much about that, but if you want to ask me questions about it, I'll be happy to try and answer them. I'm not the guy who programs it, but I have a fair understanding of how it works. If you're interested in seeing a bit more about our work, you can check our website. It's up there on the slide. I'm going to talk about basically three things. The first thing I'm going to talk about is transitions, what they are, and how they fit into our way of looking at the evolution of global economy and society up to the present time. Then I'm going to talk about scenarios, which is a way of looking ahead and trying to do it in a systematic and helpful fashion. And then finally, I'm going to try to talk a little bit about deep change. That is, what kinds of things would we need to address if we want a different sort of future than the one we seem to be on track for? So I'm going to try to do all of that in a good deal less than the hour that's allotted to me. I'm happy to answer questions anywhere along the way, but if you can hold them until the end, I can probably get through in a lot less than an hour, and then we can have a bit of dialogue. I'll just mention one other little annoyance. I'm on track to have a cataract operation when I go home. So if I appear to be squinting, that's what's going on. So what is a transition? Well, a transition is a way of describing change. And the key thing about a transition is that the change is not uniform. It turns out that when economists or physical scientists or anyone who's describing global phenomena talks about change, they usually have some fairly uniform idea of change in mind, whether it's annual rate per year or amount per year. It's usually in fairly systematic, common increments. Transitions are exactly the opposite of that. So they have an S shape Whatever it is you're measuring over time changes in this S shape. They have a takeoff, they have an acceleration, and they have a stabilization. And so down here is, you can think of one sort of world at the beginning of the transition, a rather different sort of world at the end. The idea, as near as I can tell, arises from evolution. There's a notion of punctuated equilibrium in evolution. This is a kind of generalization of that. I'm interested primarily in historical transitions, but there are many other kinds that you could think of. One kind that you might be very familiar with is a transition in communications technology, where one starts out with very little connectivity in the world, and then along comes the cell phone, and we go up this remarkable S-shaped curve, and now we're approaching almost complete connectivity. Another transition that you might be familiar with is the so-called demographic transition, where you start out in a world where we have high mortality rates and high birth rates, and then first the mortality rate falls, and then the birth rate falls. And so when those two are out of sync, you have the really rapid growth in that S-shaped curve we looked at earlier. And then at the end, you have stability again. And currently, stability is forecast to reappear, we hope, sometime in the middle of this century. So here are the basic historical transitions. There are 4 of them. This is a very schematic view of history. What you see are eras, long periods of time, during which things are relatively uniform, and then rapid change. Now, what counts as rapid depends on which era is transitioning into which. So, for example, at the end of the Stone Age, the entry into early civilization, one of the things that you saw was settled agriculture. That appears very abruptly compared to what preceded it. We can actually look at the historical records, we can look at the archaeological records, and we can actually see settled agriculture and the rise of cities in a period of time which is very short compared to everything that preceded it. And in fact, speeding up is one of the key things that this shows. So if you put a different scale in the time axis, that is, you denominate it in a logarithmic fashion, then the transitions have a much smoother shape. And so to a physical scientist or to a person who's used to thinking in growth rates, what you see here is an enormous speeding up of change. So the change from the Stone Age to early civilization is very slow. Then more quickly the change to the so-called modern era, which would be characterized by trade, by the Industrial Revolution, and so forth. And then at the very end, this planetary phase. Now, let me try to motivate a little bit this choice for these transitions, because one could break history up in many different ways. Everybody who's suffered through elementary or secondary social studies has had it broken up in one way or another, and it probably wasn't this way. But let's just look at why this way might make particular sense. Let's look at how things are organized socially. I want to go back. Okay. So if you look at how people organize themselves during these eras, you begin to see the first hints of uniformity that tell you that transitions make sense if they're organized this way.